Wednesday on the New Way, we've got our regular orator from Great Britain, Mel, who also lives at Amber's place, and she's going to be telling us about Manley Hall, or reading from Manley Hall's The Secret Teaching of All the Ages. How are you this morning, Mel?
I'm very good, thank you, Lenny. And welcome to all the listeners and everyone who's here in the Discord New Way
I
server
should
voice
say
chat.
good afternoon because it's quarter after 3 your time now in the UK. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. What's on the menu today for?
Okay, on the menu today is we're continuing with the Secret Teachings of All Ages, written by Manley P. Hall back in the 1920s. This is the fifth Wednesday we're continuing with this reading. Today we are starting on the chapter entitled The Life and Teachings of Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. And I hope I have said that right. I've had friends tutoring me on how to say it right.
I'm
Okay,
sure that how you say it is right.
excellent.
All right, let's go.
Okay. Thunder rolled, lightning flashed. The veil of the temple was rent from top to bottom. The venerable initiator, in his robes of blue and gold, slowly raised his jewelled wand and pointed with it into the darkness, revealed by the tearing of the silken curtain. Behold the light of Egypt! The candidate, in his plain white robe, gazed into the utter blackness framed by the two great lotus-headed columns between which the veil had hung. As he watched, a luminous haze distributed itself throughout the atmosphere until the air was a mass of shining particles. The face of the neophyte was illumined by the soft glow as he scanned the shimmering cloud for some tangible object. The initiator spoke again. This light which ye behold is the secret luminance of the mysteries. Whence it comes none knoweth, save the Master of the Light. Behold him! Suddenly, through the gleaming mist, a figure appeared, surrounded by a flickering greenish sheen. The initiator lowered his wand and, bowing his head, placed one hand edgewise against his breast in humble salutation. The neophyte stepped back in awe, partly blinded by the glory of the revealed figure. Gaining courage, the youth gazed again at the Divine One. The form before him was considerably larger than that of a mortal man. The body seemed partly transparent, so that the heart and brain could be seen pulsating and radiant. As the candidate watched, the heart changed into an ibis, and the brain into a flashing emerald. In its hand this mysterious being bore a winged rod entwined with serpents. The aged initiator, raising his wand, cried out in a loud voice, "All hail thee, Thoth Hermes, thrice greatest! All hail thee, Prince of Men! All hail thee, who standeth upon the head of Typhon!" At the same instant a lurid, writhing dragon appeared, a hideous monster, part serpent, part crocodile, and part hog. From its mouth and nostrils poured sheets of flame, and horrible sounds echoed through the vaulted chambers. Suddenly Hermes struck the advancing reptile with the serpent-wound staff, and with snarling cry the dragon fell over upon its side, while the flames about it slowly died away. Hermes placed his foot upon the skull of the vanquished Typhon. The next instant, with a blaze of unbearable glory that sent the neophyte staggering backward against a pillar, the immortal Hermes, followed by streamers of greenish mist, passed through the chamber and faded into nothingness. Suppositions concerning the identity of Hermes. Iamblichus averred that Hermes was the author of 20,000 books. Manetho increased the number to more than 36,000. See James Gardner. Figures which make it evident that a solitary individual, even though he be overshadowed by divine prerogative, could scarcely have accomplished such a monumental labour. Among the arts and sciences which it is affirmed Hermes revealed to mankind were medicine, chemistry, law, arc, that's A-R-C, astrology, music, rhetoric, magic, philosophy, geography, mathematics, especially geometry, anatomy, and oratory. Orpheus was similarly acclaimed by the Greeks. In his Biographia Antiquia, Francis Barrett says of Hermes, "If God ever appeared in man, he appeared in him, as is evident both from his books and his Pymander, in which works he has communicated the sum of the abyss, and the divine knowledge to all posterity, by which he has demonstrated himself to have been not only an inspired divine, but also a deep philosopher, obtaining his wisdom from God and heavenly things, but not from man." His transcendent learning caused Hermes to be identified with many of the early sages and prophets. In his ancient mythology, Bryant writes, "I have mentioned that Cadmus was the same as the Egyptian Thoth, and it is manifest from his being Hermes, and from the invention of letters being attributed to him." In the chapter on the theory of Pythagorean mathematics will be found the table of the original Cadmean letters. Investigators believe that it was Hermes who was known to the Jews as Enoch, called by Keneally the second messenger of God. Hermes was accepted into the mythology of the Greeks, later becoming the Mercury of the Latins. He was revered through the form of the planet Mercury because this body is nearest to the sun. Hermes, of all creatures, was nearest to God and became known as the messenger of the gods. In the Egyptian drawing of him, Thoth carries a waxen writing tablet and serves as the recorder during the weighing of the souls of the dead in the judgment hall of Osiris, a ritual of great significance. Hermes is of first importance to Masonic scholars because he was the author of the Masonic initiatory rituals, which were borrowed from the mysteries established by Hermes. Nearly all of the Masonic symbols are Hermetic in character. Pythagoras studied mathematics with the Egyptians, and from them gained his knowledge of the symbolic geometric solids. Hermes is also revered for his reformation of the calendar system. He increased the year from 360 to 365 days, thus establishing a precedent which still prevails. The appellation thrice greatest was given to Hermes because he was considered the greatest of all philosophers, the greatest of all priests, and the greatest of all kings. It is worthy of note that the last poem of America's beloved poet, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, was a lyric ode to Hermes. See Chambers' Encyclopedia. The multifaceted Hermetic fragments. On the subject of the Hermetic books, James Campbell Brown, in his History of Chemistry, has written, "Leaving the Chaldean and early Egyptian periods, of which we have remains but no record, and from which no names of either chemists or philosophers have come down to us, we now approach the historic period, when books were written, not at first upon parchment or paper, but upon papyrus. A series of early Egyptian books is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who may have been a real savant, or may be a personification of a long succession of writers. He is identified by some with the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth or Tuti, who was the moon god, and is represented in ancient paintings as ibis-headed with a disk and crescent of the moon. The Egyptians regarded him as the god of wisdom, letters, and the recording of time. It is in consequence of the great respect entertained for Hermes by the old alchemists that chemical writings were called hermetic, and that the phrase hermetically sealed is still in use to designate the closing of a glass vessel by fusion, after the manner of chemical manipulators. We find the same root in the hermetic medicines of Paracelsus and the hermetic Freemasonry of the Middle Ages. Among the fragmentary writings believed to have come from the stylus of Hermes are two famous works. The first is the Emerald Table, and the second is the Divine Pymander, or, as it is more commonly called, the Shepherd of Men, a discussion of which follows. One outstanding point in connection with Hermes is that he was one of the few philosopher priests of pagandom upon whom the early Christians did not vent their spleen. Some church fathers went so far as to declare that Hermes exhibited many symptoms of intelligence, and that if he had only been born in a more enlightened age, so that he might have benefited by their instructions, he would have been a really great man. In his Stromata, Clement of Alexandria, one of the few chroniclers of pagan law whose writings have been preserved to this age, gives practically all the information that is known concerning the original 42 books of Hermes, and the importance with which these books were regarded by both the temporal and spiritual powers of Egypt. Clement describes one of their ceremonial processions as follows. For the Egyptians pursue a philosophy of their own. This is principally shown by their sacred ceremonial. For first advances the singer, bearing some one of the symbols of music. For they say that he must learn 2 of the books of Hermes, the one of which contains the hymns of the gods, the second the regulations for the king's life. And after the singer advances the astrologer, with a horologe or horologe in his hand, that's spelt Horologe, and a palm, the symbols of astrology. He must have the astrological books of Hermes, which are 4 in number, always in his mouth. Of these, one is about the order of the fixed stars that are visible, and another about the conjunctions and luminous appearances of the sun and moon, and the rest respecting their risings. Next in order advances the sacred scribe, with wings on his head, and in his hand a book and rule, in which were writing ink and the reed, with which they write. And he must be acquainted with what are called hieroglyphics, and know about cosmography and geography, the position of the sun and moon, and about the 5 planets. Also the description of Egypt, and the chart of the Nile, and the description of the equipment of the priests and of the place consecrated to them, and about the measures and the things in use in the sacred rites. Then the stole keeper follows those previously mentioned, with the cubit of justice and the cup for libations. He is acquainted with all points called paidutic, and that is spelt P with an A and an E joined together, then D, EUTIC, relating to training, in brackets, and moshophaltic, that's spelt Moschophaltic, and in brackets, sacrificial. There are also 10 books which relate to the honour paid by them to their gods, and containing the Egyptian worship, as that relating to sacrifices, first fruits, hymns, prayers, processions, festivals, and the like. And behind all walks the prophet, with the water vase carried openly in his arms, who is followed by those who carry the issue of loaves. He, as being the governor of a temple, learns the 10 books called hieratic, that's Hieratic, and they contain all about the laws and the gods and the whole of the training of the priests. For the prophet is, among the Egyptians, also over the distribution of the revenues. There are then 42 books of Hermes indispensably necessary, of which the 36, containing the whole philosophy of the Egyptians, are learned by their forementioned personages, and the other 6, which are medical, by the pastophoroi, that's Pastophroi, in brackets it says image bearers, treating the structure of the body and of disease and instruments and medicines and about the eyes, and the last about women. One of the greatest tragedies of the philosophic world was the loss of nearly all of the 42 books of Hermes mentioned in the foregoing. These books disappeared during the burning of Alexandria, for the Romans, and later the Christians, realized that until these books were eliminated, they could never bring the Egyptians into subjection. The volumes which escaped the fire were buried in the desert, and their location is now known to only a few initiates of the secret schools. The Book of Thoth. While Hermes still walked the earth with men, he entrusted to his chosen successors the sacred Book of Thoth. This work contained the secret processes by which the regeneration of humanity was to be accomplished, and also served as the key to his other writings. Nothing definite is known concerning the contents of the Book of Thoth, other than that its pages were covered with strange hieroglyphic figures and symbols, which gave to those acquainted with their use unlimited power over the spirits of the air and the subterranean divinities. When certain areas of the brain are stimulated by the secret processes of the mysteries, the consciousness of man is extended, and he is permitted to behold the immortals and enter into the presence of the superior gods. The Book of Thoth described the method whereby this stimulation was accomplished. In truth, therefore, it was the key to immortality. According to legend, the Book of Thoth was kept in a golden box in the inner sanctuary of the temple. There was but one key, and this was in the possession of the Master of the Mysteries, the highest initiate of the Hermetic Arcanum. He alone knew what was written in the secret book. The Book of Thoth was lost to the ancient world with the decay of the mysteries, but its faithful initiates carried it sealed in the sacred casket into another land. The book is still in existence and continues to lead the disciples of this age into the presence of the immortals. No other information can be given to the world concerning it now, but the apostolic succession from the first Hierophant, initiated by Hermes himself, remains unbroken to this day, and those who are peculiarly fitted to serve the immortals may discover this priceless document if they will search sincerely and tirelessly for it. It has been asserted that the Book of Thoth is, in reality, the mysterious tarot of the Bohemians, a strange emblematic book of 78 leaves, which has been in possession of the gypsies since the time when they were driven from their ancient temple, the Serapeum. In brackets, according to the secret histories, the gypsies were originally Egyptian priests. There are now in the world several secret schools privileged to initiate candidates into the mysteries, but in nearly every instance they lighted their altar fires from the flaming torch of Hermes, in his Book of Thoth, revealed to all mankind the one way, and for ages the wise of every nation and every faith have reached immortality by the way, established by Hermes, in the midst of a darkness, for the redemption of humankind. Okay, it's nearly half an hour, so I'll give you opportunity to stop and anyone want to discuss anything?
Yeah, I have something to bring up. I found it interesting how you mentioned that the symbols seem to give power. And speculate how the hieroglyphs in the Book of Thoth might give somebody power. How would you think that would happen?
Well, it's similar, I think, to Reiki symbols. So, if Reiki symbology can be used to confer certain attributes to the Reiki that's received, or how it's assimilated in the body, and also the Fuvok runes, or the runic system, um, which also is fabled to certain runes, the original runes, to possess certain abilities to transmute energy in and of themselves. And then we find things such as the sacred geometric patterns and shapes, that objects made in certain geometric patterns can transmute energy. So personally, I don't see any reason that hieroglyphics in and of themselves wouldn't have the ability, if used in certain ways, to transmute energy into different frequencies, which is what we really call power in that sense.
Yes, words and energy and frequency and power all have a relation to each other. And I'm not sure that we understand the energy that are in the words that we use sometimes. Dennis, is that you piping in?
Yeah, I was just wanting to say, a long time ago, the healing system that I'm part of has Egyptian initiations into Egyptian energies within it, and I've had the initiations, and I've worked a little bit with the energies. I found them to be very heavy, and plus I had some issues with Anubis. Wanting to be there more than I wanted him to be there. So that whatever the thought form of Anubis is, or the idea of Anubis was around a bit more than I wanted him to be. So I stopped working in that way. But when I was working in that way, I found the energy to be quite heavy, and it was like wading through treacle. And I find the similar thing with runes. Well, I've worked a little bit with runes recently. Runes are very sharp and very precise, but they have side effects in my experience, and I found the same thing with Egyptian energy. It had unwanted side effects. So I stopped working that way, and I don't work with runes very often. If I've got something specific that I need to do, then I'll work with runes, and I might at some point go back to working with Egyptian energies, but the side effects are not necessarily pleasant with both of those energies. I think they're so old and so embedded in a particular culture that if you try and use them outside of that context, it becomes complicated. That's my experience.
I've played with different energies that I have more luck working with physical energies that I can envision arise from the chemistry than I have with the word semantics that I can use. But I was very good at word semantics early on in my career, and there is magic to the phrasing of how words can be. In fact, Hermes Trismegistus really was somebody in history who developed the art of magic.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's something there that's been used, and it's been used very effectively. And we've got a kind of diluted, reconstructed version of it now. But in the context of the culture that it was in originally, it was very, very, very effective.
It is concerning.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lenny.
Go, Mel. No problem.
My concern with now we have such ease of dissemination of this kind of information to the world population, or a lot of the world population, then this may be a reason, for example, at some point in time, the religious orders decided to suppress knowledge and access to such information. Because you can imagine if every Tom, Dick and Harry read the Book of Thoth, for example, and started playing with those symbols and accessing those energies, I mean, it would be chaos. I think, and from what you're saying, Dennis, I can definitely see that I would suggest that people spend a lot of time trying to understand these energies before they play with them, because they can have unintended side effects on you and others around you because of ignorance and also a person's own state of consciousness, in terms of the intent behind which they wish to play with the energies. And I'm talking about the real intent, the subconscious intent, not necessarily what is in their conscious mind. And also, if they haven't worked on their shadow self, if they haven't dealt with their own traumas and repressed emotional energy, then all of these, I would have thought, could affect the transmutation of energy via using such symbols and runes. What do you think about that, Dennis?
Nobody would ever get to that point, Mel, if they took that advice, because they would be so scared to read the runes in the first place because of the possibility of what might be there. I think people need to roll up their sleeves and dive in. But Dennis, the question to ask to you.
I'm cautious because I've got experience of working with symbols for 20 years, and I'm still very, very cautious with runes. I wouldn't, unless you want all hell to break loose in your life and chaos to ensue, I wouldn't advise anybody to work with runes unless there's something very, very clear that you want to do that's got a high intent to it, that you know there's no subliminal stuff going on. I agree with Mel, actually, that you need that everything that happens in the process is part of the process. So whatever runes you could potentially say that anything that happens as a result of working with runes is to bring up your shadow side, so that you can consciously work with it and transmute that energy. Personally, I'd rather work with something else that's a bit gentler, because I know from experience that all hell breaks loose if I work with runes, and I'm not somebody who wants to live in hell, quite honestly. I've got other things to do in my life than deal with issues that I brought up myself because I was a bit playful with stuff.
Okay, should I carry on?
Okay, time to carry on.
Okay, the next heading is Poimandres, Poimandres, the vision of Hermes. Oh, I forgot to say earlier to new listeners, anyone can read this text. It's housed on a website called www.sacredtext.com, and this is the original text. The divine Poimander of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus is one of the earliest of the Hermetic writings now extant. while probably not in its original form, having been remodelled during the first centuries of the Christian era and incorrectly translated since. This work undoubtedly contains many of the original concepts of the Hermetic cultus. The Divine Pymander consists of 17 fragmentary writings gathered together and put forth as one work. The second book of the Divine Pymander, called Poimandes, Poimandres, or the Vision, is believed to describe the method by which the divine wisdom was first revealed to Hermes. It was after Hermes had received this revelation that he began his ministry, teaching to all who would listen the secrets of the invisible universe as they had been unfolded to him. The Vision is the most famous of all the Hermetic fragments and contains an exposition of Hermetic cosmogony and the secret sciences of the Egyptians regarding the culture and unfoldment of the human soul. For some time it was erroneously called the Genesis of Enoch, but that mistake has now been rectified. At hand, while preparing the following interpretation of the symbolic philosophy concealed within the Vision of Hermes, the present author has had these reference works: The Divine Pymander of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, from London 1650, translated out of the Arabic and Greek by Dr Everard. Hermetica, Oxford 1924, edited by Walter Scott. Hermes, The Mysteries of Egypt, Philadelphia 1925, by Edward Shure, and The Thrice Greatest Hermes, London 1906, by G.R.S. Mead. To the material contained in the above volumes he has added commentaries based upon the esoteric philosophy of the ancient Egyptians, together with amplifications derived partly from other Hermetic fragments and partly from the secret arcanum of the Hermetic sciences. For the sake of clarity, the narrative form has been chosen in preference to the original dialogic style, and obsolete words have given place to those in current use. Hermes, while wandering in a rocky and desolate place, gave himself over to meditation and prayer. Following the secret instructions of the temple, he gradually freed his higher consciousness from the bondage of his bodily senses, and thus released, his divine nature revealed to him the mysteries of the transcendental spheres. He beheld a figure, terrible and awe-inspiring. It was the great dragon, with wings stretching across the sky and light streaming in all directions from its body. In brackets, the mysteries taught that the universal life was personified as a dragon. Close brackets. The great dragon called Hermes by name and asked him why he thus meditated upon the world mystery. Terrified by the spectacle, Hermes prostrated himself before the dragon, beseeching it to reveal its identity. The great creature answered that it was Poimandres, the mind of the universe, the creative intelligence, and the absolute emperor of all. In brackets, Shure identifies Poimandres as the god Osiris. Close brackets. Hermes then besought Poimandres to disclose the nature of the universe and the constitution of the gods. The dragon acquiesced, bidding Trismegistus hold its image in his mind. Immediately the form of Poimandres changed. Where it had stood there was a glorious and pulsating radiance. This light was the spiritual nature of the great dragon itself. Hermes was raised into the midst of this divine effulgence, and the universe of material things faded from his consciousness. Presently a great darkness descended, and expanding, swallowed up the light. Everything was troubled. About Hermes swirled a mysterious watery substance which gave forth a smoke-like vapour. The air was filled with inarticulate moanings and sighings, which seemed to come from the light swallowed up in the darkness. His mind told Hermes that the light was the form of the spiritual universe, and that the swirling darkness which had engulfed it represented material substance. Then, out of the imprisoned light, a mysterious and holy word came forth, and took its stand upon the smoking waters. This word, the voice of the light, rose out of the darkness as a great pillar, and the fire and the air followed after it. But the earth and the water remained unmoved below. Thus the waters of light were divided from the waters of darkness, and from the waters of light were formed the worlds above, and from the waters of darkness were formed the worlds below. The earth and the water next mingled, becoming inseparable, and the spiritual word, which is called reason, moved upon their surface, causing endless turmoil. Then again was heard the voice of Poimandes, but his form was not revealed. I, thy God, and the light and the mind, which were before substance, was divided from spirit, and darkness from light. And the word which appeared as a pillar of flame out of the darkness is the Son of God, born of the mystery of the mind. The name of that word is reason. Reason is the offspring of thought, and reason shall divide the light from the darkness, and establish truth in the midst of the waters. Understand, O Hermes, and meditate deeply upon the mystery. That which in you sees and hears is not of the earth, but is the word of God incarnate. So it is said that divine light dwells in the midst of mortal darkness, and ignorance cannot divide them. The union of the word and the mind produces that mystery which is called life. As the darkness without you is divided against itself, so the darkness within you is likewise divided. The light and the fire which rise are the divine man, ascending in the path of the word, and that which fails to ascend is the mortal man, which may not partake of immortality. Learn deeply of the mind and its mystery, for therein lies the secret of immortality. The dragon again revealed its form to Hermes, and for a long time the two looked steadfastly upon one upon the other, eye to eye, so that Hermes trembled before the gaze of Poimandes. At the word of the dragon the heavens opened, and the innumerable light powers were revealed, soaring through cosmos on pinions of streaming fire. Hermes beheld the spirits of the stars, the celestials controlling the universe, and all those powers which shine with the radiance of the one fire, the glory of the sovereign mind. Hermes realized that the sight which he beheld was revealed to him only because Poimandes had spoken a word. The word was reason, and by the reason of the word invisible things were made manifest. Divine mind, the dragon, continued its discourse. Before the visible universe was formed, its mould was cast. This mould was called the archetype, and this archetype was in the supreme mind long before the process of creation began. Beholding the archetypes, the supreme mind became enamored with its own thought. So, taking the word as a mighty hammer, it gorged out caverns in primordial space and cast the forms of the spheres in the archetypal mode, at the same time sowing in the newly fashioned bodies the seeds of living things. The darkness below, receiving the hammer of the word, was fashioned into an orderly universe. The elements separated into strata, and each brought forth living creatures. The Supreme Being, the Mind, male and female, brought forth the Word. And the Word, suspended between light and darkness, was delivered of another mind called the Workman, the Master Builder, or the Maker of Things. In this manner it was accomplished, O Hermes. The Word, moving like a breath through space, called forth the fire by the friction of its motion. Therefore the fire is called the Sun of Striving. The Workman passed as a whirlwind through the universe, causing the substances to vibrate and glow with its friction. The Sun of Striving thus formed 7 governors, the spirits of the planets, whose orbits bounded the world, and the 7 governors controlled the world by the mysterious power called destiny, given them by the fiery Workman. When the second mind, the Workman, had organized chaos, the Word of God rose straightway out of its prison of substance, leaving the elements without reason, and joined itself to the nature of the fiery Workman. Then the second mind, together with the risen Word, established itself in the midst of a universe, and whirled the wheels of the celestial powers. This shall continue from an infinite beginning to an infinite end, for the beginning and the ending are in the same place and state. Then the downward turned and unreasoning elements brought forth creatures without reason. Substance could not bestow reason, for reason had ascended out of it. The air produced flying things, and the waters such as swim. The earth conceived strange, 4-footed and creeping beasts, dragons, composite demons, and grotesque monsters. Then the Father, the Supreme Mind, being light and life, fashioned a glorious, universal man in its own image. Not an earthly man, but a heavenly man dwelling in the light of God. The Supreme Mind loved the man it had fashioned, and delivered to him the control of the creations and workmanships. The man, desiring to labour, took up his abode in the sphere of generation, and observed the works of his brother, the second mind, which sat upon the ring of fire. And having beheld the achievements of the fiery Workman, he willed also to make things, and his father gave permission. The 7 governors, of whose powers he partook, rejoiced, and each gave the man a share of its own nature. The man longed to pierce the circumference of the circles, and understand the mystery of him who sat upon the eternal fire. Having already all power, he stooped down and peeped through the 7 harmonies, and, breaking through the strength of the circles, made himself manifest to nature stretched out below. The man, looking into the depths, smiled, for he beheld a shadow upon the earth, and a likeness mirrored in the waters, which shadow and likeness were a reflection of himself. The man fell in love with his own shadow, and desired to descend into it. Coincident with the desire, the intelligent thing united itself with the unreasoning image or shape. Nature, beholding the descent, wrapped herself about the man whom she loved, and the two were mingled. For this reason, earthly man is a composite. Within him is the sky man, immortal and beautiful. Without is nature, mortal and destructible. Thus, suffering is the result of the immortal man's falling in love with his shadow, and giving up reality to dwell in the darkness of illusion. For, being immortal, man has the power of the 7 governors, also the life, the light, and the Word. But being mortal, He is controlled by the rings of the governors, fate or destiny. Of the immortal man it should be said that he is hermaphrodite, or male and female, and eternally watchful. He neither slumbers nor sleeps, and is governed by a father, also both male and female, and ever watchful. Such is the mystery kept hidden to this day, for nature, being mingled in marriage with the skyman, brought forth a wonder most wonderful. 7 men, all bisexual, male and female, and upright of stature, each one exemplifying the natures of the 7 governors. These, O Hermes, are the 7 races, species, and wheels. After this manner were the 7 men generated. Earth was the female element, and water the male element. And from the fire and the ether they received their spirits. And nature produced bodies after the species and shapes of men. And man received the life and light of the great dragon, and of the life was made his soul, and of the light his mind. And so all these composite creatures, containing immortality, but partaking of mortality, continued in this state for the duration of a period. They reproduced themselves out of themselves, for each was male and female. But at the end of the period, the knot of destiny was untied by the will of God, and the bond of all things was loosened. Then all living creatures, including man, which had been hermaphroditical, were separated, the males being set apart by themselves, and the females likewise, according to the dictates of reason. Then God spoke to the holy word within the soul of all things, saying, Increase in increasing, and multiply in multitudes, all you, my creatures and workmanships. Let him that is endued with mind know himself to be immortal, and that the cause of death is the love of the body. And let him learn all things that are, for he who has recognized himself enters into the state of good. And when God had said this, Providence, with the aid of the 7 governors, and harmony, brought the sexes together, making the mixtures and establishing the generations. And all things were multiplied according to their kind. He who through the error of attachment loves his body, abides wandering in darkness, sensible and suffering the things of death. But he who realizes that the body is but the tomb of his soul, rises to immortality. Then Hermes desired to know why men should be deprived of immortality for the sin of ignorance alone. The great dragon answered, To the ignorant, the body is supreme, and they are incapable of realizing the immortality that is within them. Knowing only the body, which is subject to death, they believe in death because they worship that substance which is the cause and reality of death. Then Hermes asked how the righteous and wise pass to God, to which Poimander replied, That which the word of God said, say I. Because the Father of all things consists of life and light, whereof man is made. If, therefore, a man shall learn and understand the nature of life and light, then he shall pass into the eternity of life and light. Hermes next inquired about the road by which the wise attained to life eternal. And Poimander continued, Let the man endued with a mind mark, consider, and learn of himself, and with the power of his mind divide himself from his not-self, and become a servant of reality. Hermes asked if all men did not have minds, and the great dragon replied, Take heed what you say, for I am the mind, the eternal teacher. I am the father of the word, the redeemer of all men, and in the nature of the wise, The Word takes flesh. By means of the Word, the world is saved. I, Thought, in brackets Thoth, the father of the Word, the mind, come only unto men that are holy and good, pure and merciful, and that live piously and religiously. And my presence is an inspiration and a help to them. For when I come, they immediately know all things, and adore the universal Father. Before such wise and philosophic ones die, they learn to renounce their senses, knowing that these are the enemies of their immortal souls. I will not permit the evil senses to control the bodies of those who love me, nor will I allow evil emotions and evil thoughts to enter them. I become as a porter or doorkeeper, and shut out evil, protecting the wise from their own lower nature. But to the wicked, the envious, and the covetous, I come not, for such cannot understand the mysteries of mind. Therefore I am unwelcome. I leave them to the avenging demon that they are making in their own souls. For evil each day increases itself and torments man more sharply, and each evil deed adds to the evil deeds that are gone before, until finally evil destroys itself. The punishment of desire is the agony of unfulfillment. Hermes bowed his head in thankfulness to the great dragon who had taught him so much, and begged to hear more concerning the ultimate of the human soul. So Poimander resumed. At death, the material body of man is returned to the elements from which it came, and the invisible divine man ascends to the source from whence he came, namely the 8th sphere. The evil passes to the dwelling place of the demon, and the senses, feelings, desires, and body passions return to their source, namely the 7 governors, whose natures in the lower man destroy, but in the invisible spiritual man give life. After the lower nature has returned to the brutishness, the higher struggles again to regain its spiritual estate. It ascends the 7 rings upon which sit the 7 governors, and returns to each their lower powers in this manner. Upon the first ring sits the moon, and so to it is returned the ability to increase and diminish. Upon the second ring sits Mercury, and so to it are returned machinations, deceit, and craftiness. Upon the third ring sits Venus, and to it are returned the lusts and passions. Upon the fourth ring sits the Sun, and to this lord are returned ambitions. Upon the fifth ring sits Mars, and to it are returned rashness and profane boldness. Upon the 6th ring sits Jupiter, and to it are returned the sense of accumulation and riches. And upon the 7th ring sits Saturn, at the gate of chaos, and to it are returned falsehood and evil plotting. Then, being naked of all the accumulations of the 7 rings, the soul comes to the 8th sphere, namely the ring of the fixed stars. Here, freed of all illusion, it dwells in the light, and sings praises to the Father in a voice which only the pure spirit may understand. Behold, O Hermes, there is a great mystery in the 8th sphere, for the Milky Way is the seed ground of souls, and from it they drop into the rings, and to the Milky Way they return again from the wheels of Saturn. But some cannot climb the 7-runged ladder of the rings, so they wander in darkness below, and are swept into eternity with the illusion of sense and earthiness. The path to immortality is hard, and only a few find it. The rest await the great day when the wheels of the universe shall be stopped, and the immortal sparks shall escape from the sheaths of substance. Woe unto those who wait, for they must return again, unconscious and unknowing, to the seed ground of stars, and await a new beginning. those who are saved by the light of the mystery which I have revealed unto you, O Hermes, and which I now bid you to establish among men, shall return again to the Father who dwelleth in the white light, and shall deliver themselves up to the light, and shall be absorbed into the light. And in the light they shall become powers in God. This is the way of good, and is revealed only to them that have wisdom. Blessed art thou, O Son of Light, to whom of all men I, Poimander, the light of the world, have revealed myself. I order you to go forth, to become as a guide to those who wander in darkness, that all men within whom dwells the spirit of my mind, the universal mind, may be saved by my mind in you, which shall call forth my mind in them. Establish my mysteries, and they shall not fail from the earth, for I am the mind of the mysteries, and until mind fails, which is never, my mysteries cannot fail. With these parting words, Poimander, radiant with celestial light, vanished, mingling with the powers of the heavens. Raising his eyes unto the heavens, Hermes blessed the Father of all things, and consecrated his life to the service of the great light. Thus preached Hermes: O people of the earth, men born and made of the elements, but with the spirit of a divine man within you, rise from your sleep of ignorance. Be sober and thoughtful. Realize that your home is not in the earth, but in the light. Why have you delivered yourselves over unto death, having power to partake of immortality? Repent and change your minds. Depart from the dark light, and forsake corruption forever. Prepare yourselves to climb through the 7 rings, and to blend your souls with the eternal light. Some who heard mocked and scoffed and went their way, delivering themselves to the second death, from which there is no salvation. But others, casting themselves before the feet of Hermes, besought him to teach them the way of life. He lifted them gently, receiving no approbation for himself, and staff in hand went forth, teaching and guiding mankind, and showing them how they might be saved. In the worlds of men, Hermes sowed the seeds of wisdom, and nourished the seeds with the immortal waters. And at last came the evening of his life, and as the brightness of the light of earth was beginning to go down, Hermes commanded his disciples to preserve his doctrines inviolate throughout all ages. The vision of Poimander's he committed to writing, that all men desiring immortality might therein find the way. In concluding his exposition of the vision, Hermes wrote: The sleep of the body is the sober watchfulness of the mind, and the shutting of my eyes reveals the true light. My silence is filled with budding life and hope, and is full of good. My words are the blossoms of fruit of the tree of my soul. For this is the faithful account of what I received from my true mind, that is Poimander, the great dragon, the lord of the word, through whom I became inspired by God with the truth. Since that day my mind has been ever with me, and in my own soul it hath given birth to the word. The word is reason, and reason hath redeemed me. For which cause, with all my soul and all my strength, I give praise and blessing unto God the Father, the light and the life, and the eternal good. Holy is God, the Father of all things, the one who is before the first beginning. Holy is God, whose will is performed and accomplished by his own powers, which he hath given birth to out of himself. Holy is God, who has determined that he shall be known, and who is known by his own, to whom he reveals himself. Holy art thou, who by thy word (in brackets reason) hast established all things. Holy art thou, of whom all nature is the image. Holy art thou, whom the inferior nature has not formed. Holy art thou, who art stronger than all powers. Holy art thou, who art greater than all excellency. Holy art thou, who art better than all praise. Accept these reasonable sacrifices from a pure soul and a heart stretched out unto thee. O thou unspeakable, unutterable, to be praised with silence. I beseech thee to look mercifully upon me, for I may not err from the knowledge of thee, and that I may enlighten those that are in ignorance, my brothers and thy sons. Therefore I believe thee, and bear witness unto thee, and depart in peace and in trustfulness into thy light and life. Blessed art thou, O Father. The man thou hast fashioned would be sanctified with thee, as thou hast given him power to sanctify others with thy word and thy truth. The vision of Hermes, like nearly all of the Hermetic writings, is an allegorical exposition of great philosophic and mystic truths, and its hidden meaning may be comprehended only by those who have been raised into the presence of the true mind. And that's the end of this chapter. The next is the initiation of the pyramid. So I shall pause there to allow discussion while I take a break. I'll mute and I'll unmute when I come back. Would anyone like to discuss what I've written?
It looks like Lenny's dropped out.
Oh. Okay then.
But it's still going on via the cloud therapy, so we can just continue
the
show till he returns, I guess, in our own way.
Okay.
Flame intuition.
So I don't know about you, but as I was reading that, I was thinking of the Sumerian creation myths. And obviously Christianity, like the Old Testament, it's you can see the connections between them all, can't you?
Yeah, I think the level of trading and the level of cross-cultural kind of communication that was going on was huge around the Mediterranean, so that everybody was taking all their creation myths to other places all the time, I think, and they all got mixed up.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And so the rings of the planets, okay, that they're in the wrong order, according to, the majority current view. But still, those attributes seem to emanate from those celestial bodies, don't they, in astrology?
Yeah, there's a lot of old stuff that still applies. At some point I was doing a little bit of medieval astrology, like medieval-based astrology that came from Robert Zoller. I was reading his stuff, and there's a lot of techniques that come from like the Sabian ideas, the Haranian Sabians, which is a Syrian area, which go back a long way, and I think originally come from these type of ideas. There's a technique called Fidaria, which is like allocating time periods to each planet in somebody's life. I remember, I don't know whether I've told this story before, but I remember at one point when I was at an astrology meeting. It was actually the Astrological Lodge of London Christmas party. This would be about 2004 or something. I met a woman there, and because I was experimenting, I volunteered to do her a reading, or she asked me a question or something. But I remember doing her a reading based on Fidaria, and counting in my head to get to the place where I could do the reading, and I remember it was remarkable, because I said to her that her daughter was going to get pregnant and would have either a son or a daughter. I said something specific anyway. And it would be in this particular month, which was like 18 months' time or something. It was a long time. And she wasn't even pregnant at the time. So it was like doing that based on one technique from medieval astrology, like Syrian medieval astrology. And I met the woman a couple of years later, and she said that a daughter had a baby on this particular month, which was exactly what I said to her.
Wow.
So I know from experience that you can do that a year and a half or 2 years in advance with that type of astrological technique, and the kind of the power and the energy and the way that I mean, how on earth can that possibly happen? There's no way that can possibly happen. There's no way you can predict the month that somebody's going to have a baby and the sex of their baby 18 months in advance when you've never met the person. It's impossible for that to happen. But it has happened. I've done it. So I know that some of the techniques, I don't know, I'm not saying every technique, but I know some of the older techniques have still got a lot of validity to them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It was just remarkable.
I mean, I was watching something recently, and I'm trying to think what it was or where I came across it. Oh, it was Larry Hunter's interviews on watch some on YouTube, and his work on Egypt, and he theorizes that the pyramids originally were some sort of power generators, but they also had the capacity to transfer people's souls, okay, out of their physical bodies to, I'm presuming what this Hermes is calling the light. So, and back again. But when they were used thus, the Earth's orbit was only 360 days. And so when the Earth's orbit changed, don't know why, but when it changed to 365 days, basically they couldn't come back. And the pyramids stopped working. And that was the descent, basically, of man's knowledge in this area. Because something happened, and it must have been pretty cataclysmic, to change the Earth, or to knock the Earth out of its original orbit into a wider orbit. Or to change it, if you look at the Earth as the center, then depending on your views, then to change the sun's orbit around the Earth. And it seems to me that and I agree that there is great validity in astrology and how it affects our lives. That if this is the case, then it lends credence to the modern theory that this reality is analogous to a virtual reality computer construct of some description, and the celestial bodies are hardware that operate and control the system, that influence its mechanics, and that we are both hardware and software. And are therefore under the influence of those machinations.
Yeah, I'm not really. I resist the simulation hypothesis. It comes from Philip K. Dick, I think, that originally, but before that, it's kind of the equivalent of René Descartes' evil demon, which is a Gnostic idea, and I resist it, and I'm not sure why, but I start to kind of, my body closes up, my body language closes up when I start to think about that. And I don't like it for some reason, so I'm going to resist it now as well. Yeah. Because it closes my body language up, and that's not the way I want to be. I don't want to be kind of huddled over.
I did as well. When I first come across it, I was resistant to it because I think that it implies, like, we've grown up with this concept that we have free will, or that if we don't have it now, it's a potentiality, and the thought that the I forgot what word you used, but this being a virtual reality kind of construct, we are avatars within it. that belies that concept. That suggests we don't have free will, that we are under the influence of the known and possibly the unknown influences of all sorts of different things. But I think the more that we are learning scientifically, the more apparent it appears that it is the case that this is a construct and we are avatars. However, our soul, I believe, is not. I think our soul, our higher self, does have free will, and it is outside of the influences of a construct. But while we are alive, we forget. We think we are the avatar, and by that belief, we shut down our ability or impede our ability to communicate effectively and fluidly with our higher self. And only by doing that can we have any hope of re-attaining any semblance of free will. That's kind of how I see it now.
Yeah, I mean, I can go with you about 95% on the no free will thing, because that's kind of how I'm living my life at the moment. And probably even get to 97.5% if I push it. And it makes sense to me to just be and respond, but it hasn't for a long time. So I'm 53 years old. It's taken me 53 years to get to the point where I'm happy just to be and respond.
Yeah.
And for a good chunk of that time, I was very conscious of my own part in the process that was going on. So what I think is that it's like there's not really levels, but there's kind of layers of consciousness that have different rules to them, I think. So for the sake of argument, for the last 20 years, I've been very involved in the free choice or free will element of it. Before that, I wasn't. I was just responding, and I wasn't really conscious at all up to about 30. I was just getting drunk and having a good time, basically. And then I flipped into the free will, more conscious choice, more kind of very much focused on the higher self kind of level of things. So I think that process of the last 20 years has got me to the place where I can then let go of the free will, if that makes sense. But I don't think I could have let go of it 20 years ago.
Yeah. No,
I think I needed to flip into it and then flip out of it again. It's difficult to explain, and the words don't really do justice. But I'm just trying to explain my own experience of the process.
Yeah.
And now I've got to that point, I can let go, and I can just be and respond. And I'm in an environment most of the time where being and responding is okay, because I know it's not a hostile environment. If you're in something that you perceive as a hostile environment, you need free will to defend yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was holding on to the free will and the free choice to defend myself against a hostile environment. But now that I've kind of opened up a bit and I'm in a space where I don't see the world as hostile anymore, whereas for a long time I did. And the only way that you can just be and respond is when you don't see the world as hostile. That's like the key piece of that puzzle, I think. So I had to let go of all my paranoia and all my anxiety and all my fear about shit. Obviously, there's still a little bit there, but it's like it's reasonable fear. You've got to have a reasonable fear if you're crossing the road in front of traffic just to stay alive. You've got to kind of have that little bit of reasonable, sensible interaction with the world, that's like awareness of the world rather than fear. Does that make sense, or am I rambling?
No, it does make sense, absolutely. I completely understand as well. Okay, I'm just going to go on. I've just asked some friends to send me some Reiki because my neck is a bit sore. I think it's the way I'm sitting on this chair. But okay, thank you. Okay, so the next section is called The Initiation of the Pyramid. Supreme among the wonders of antiquity, unrivaled by the achievements of later architects and builders, The Great Pyramid of Giza bears mute witness to an unknown civilization which, having completed its predestined span, passed into oblivion. Eloquent in its silence, inspiring in its majesty, divine in its simplicity, the Great Pyramid is indeed a sermon in stone. Its magnitude overwhelms the puny sensibilities of man. Among the shifting sands of time, it stands as a fitting emblem of eternity itself. Who were the illumined mathematicians who planned its parts and dimensions, the master craftsmen who supervised its construction, the skilled artisans who trued its blocks of stone? The earliest and best known account of the building of the Great Pyramid is that given by the highly revered but somewhat imaginative historian Herodotus. The pyramid was built in steps, battlement-wise, as it is called, or, according to others, altar-wise. After laying the stones for the base, they raised the remaining stones to their places by means of machines formed of short wooden planks. The first machine raised them from the ground to the top of the first step. On this there was another machine, which received the stone upon its arrival and conveyed it to the second step, whence a third machine advanced it still higher. Either they had as many machines as there were steps in the pyramid, or possibly they had but a single machine, which, being easily moved, was transferred from tier to tier as the stone rose. Both accounts are given, and therefore I mention both. The upper portion of the pyramid was finished first, then the middle, and finally the part which was lowest and nearest the ground. There is an inscription in Egyptian characters on the pyramid which records the quantity of radishes, onions, and garlic consumed by the labourers who constructed it. And I perfectly well remember that the interpreter who read the writing to me said that the money expended in this way was 1,600 talents of silver. If this, then, is a true record, what a vast sum must have been spent on the iron tools used in the work, and on the feeding and clothing of the labourers, considering the length of time of the work lasted, which has already been stated, in brackets 10 years, and the additional time, no small space, I imagine, which must have been occupied by the quarrying of the stones, their conveyance, and the formation of the underground apartments. While his account is extremely colourful, it is apparent that the father of history, for reasons which he doubtless considered sufficient, concocted a fraudulent story to conceal the true origin and purpose of the Great Pyramid. This is but one of several instances in his writings which would lead the thoughtful reader to suspect that Herodotus himself was an initiate of the sacred schools, and consequently obligated to preserve inviolate the secrets of the ancient orders. The theory advanced by Herodotus, and now generally accepted, that the pyramid was the tomb of the pharaoh Cheops, cannot be substantiated. In fact, Manetho, Eratosthenes, and Diodorus Siculus all differ from Herodotus, as well as from each other, regarding the name of the builder of this supreme edifice. The sepulchral vault, which, according to the Lepsius law of pyramid construction, should have been finished at the same time as the monument or sooner, was never completed. There is no proof that the building was erected by the Egyptians, for the elaborate carvings with which the burial chambers of Egyptian royalty are almost invariably ornamented are entirely lacking, and it embodies none of the elements of their architecture or decoration, such as inscriptions, images, cartouches, paintings, and other distinctive features associated with dynastic mortuary art. The only hieroglyphics to be found within the pyramid are a few builders' marks sealed up in the chambers of construction, first opened by Howard Weiss. These apparently were painted upon the stones before they were set in position, for in a number of instances the marks were either inverted or disfigured by the operation of fitting the blocks together. While Egyptologists have attempted to identify the crude dabs of paint as cartouches of Cheops, it is almost inconceivable that this ambitious ruler would have permitted his royal name to suffer such indignities. As the most eminent authorities on the subject are still uncertain as to the true meaning of these crude markings, whatever proof they might be that the building was erected during the 4th dynasty, is certainly offset by the seashells at the base of the pyramid, which Mr. Gabb advances as evidence that it was erected before the deluge, a theory substantiated by the much abused Arabian traditions. One Arabian historian declared that the pyramid was built by the Egyptian sages as a refuge against the flood, while another proclaimed it to have been the treasure house of a powerful antediluvian king, Shaddad ben Ad. A panel of hieroglyphs over the entrance, which the casual observer might consider to afford a solution of the mystery, unfortunately dates back no further than AD 1843, having been cut at that time by Dr. Lepsius as a tribute to the King of Prussia. Caliph al-Mamun, an illustrious descendant of the Prophet, inspired by stories of the immense treasures sealed within its depths, journeyed from Baghdad to Cairo AD 820 with a great force of workmen to open the mighty pyramid. When Caliph al-Mamun first reached the foot of the Rock of Ages and gazed up at its smooth, glistening surface, a tumult of emotions undoubtedly racked his soul. The casing stones must have been in place at the time of his visit, for the Caliph could find no indication of an entrance. 4 perfectly smooth surfaces confronted him. Following vague rumours, he set his followers to work on the north side of the pyramid, with instructions to keep on cutting and chiselling until they discovered something. To the Muslims, with their crude instruments and vinegar, it was a Herculean effort to tunnel a full 100 feet through the limestone. Many times they were on the point of rebellion, but the word of a caliph was law, and the hope of a vast fortune buoyed them up. At last, on the eve of total discouragement, fate came to their rescue. A great stone was heard to fall somewhere in the wall near the toiling and disgruntled Arabs. Pushing on toward the sound with renewed enthusiasm, they finally broke into the descending passage which leads into the subterranean chamber. They then chiselled their way around the great stone portcullis which had fallen into a position barring their progress, and attacked and removed, one after another, the granite plugs, which for a while continued to slide down the passage leading from the Queen's chamber above. Finally, no more blocks descended, and the way was clear for the followers of the Prophet. But where were the treasures? From room to room the frantic workmen rushed, looking in vain for loot. The discontent of the Muslims reached such a height that Caliph al-Mamun, who had inherited much of the wisdom of his illustrious father, the Caliph al-Rashid, sent to Baghdad for funds, which he caused to be secretly buried near the entrance of the pyramid. He then ordered his men to dig at that spot, and great was their rejoicing when the treasure was discovered, the workmen being deeply impressed by the wisdom of the antediluvian monarch, who had carefully estimated their wages and thoughtfully caused the exact amount to be buried for their benefit. The Caliph then returned to the city of his fathers, and the great pyramid was left to the mercy of succeeding generations. In the 9th century, the sun's rays striking the highly polished surfaces of the original casing stones caused each side of the pyramid to appear as a dazzling triangle of light. Since that time, all but 2 of these casing stones have disappeared. Investigation has resulted in their discovery, recut and resurfaced in the walls of Mohammedan mosques and palaces in various parts of Cairo and its environs.
Mel, if I may interrupt you before more time disappears like those pyramids, I just want to remind our listeners that they are listening to New Way on Steempunk Radio, and it can be found on the TuneIn app by searching for Steempunk with 2 E's Radio, or they can also find out what's going on with our host Lenny Thyme on steemit with 2 E's.com /the @Lenny Thyme. That's THYME. And you are listening to Mel from Amber's Place, whose channel that you can find on YouTube. Thank you for allowing me to interrupt you, and please continue.
Thank you very much. Okay. Pyramid problems. C. Piazzi Smith, that's Smith with a Y, asks, was the Great Pyramid, then, erected before the invention of hieroglyphics and previous to the birth of the Egyptian religion? Time may yet prove that the upper chambers of the pyramid were a sealed mystery before the establishment of the Egyptian Empire. In the subterranean chamber, however, are markings which indicate that the Romans gained admission there. In the light of the secret philosophy of the Egyptian initiates, W. Harmon, by a series of extremely complicated, yet exact mathematical calculations, determines that the first ceremonial of the pyramid was performed 68,890 years ago, on the occasion when the star Vega, for the first time, sent its rays down the descending passage into the pit. The actual building of the pyramid was accomplished in the period of from 10 to 15 years immediately preceding this date. While such figures doubtless will evoke the ridicule of modern Egyptologists, they are based upon an exhaustive study of the principles of sidereal mechanics as incorporated into the structure of the pyramid by its initiated builders. If the casing stones were in position at the beginning of the 9th century, the so-called erosion marks upon the outside were not due to water. The theory also that the salt upon the interior stones of the pyramid is evidence that the building was once submerged is weakened by the scientific fact that this kind of stone is subject to exudations of salt. While the building may have been submerged, at least in part, during the many thousands of years since its erection, the evidence adduced to prove this point is not conclusive. The Great Pyramid was built of limestone and granite throughout, the two kinds of rock being combined in a peculiar and significant manner. The stones were trued with the utmost precision, and the cement used was of such remarkable quality that it is now practically as hard as the stone itself. The limestone blocks were sawed with bronze saws, the teeth of which were diamonds or other jewels. The chips from the stones were piled against the north side of the plateau on which the structure stands, where they form an additional buttress to aid in supporting the weight of the structure. The entire pyramid is an example of perfect orientation and actually squares the circle. This last is accomplished by dropping a vertical line from the apex of the pyramid to its baseline. If this vertical line be considered as the radius of an imaginary circle, the length of the circumference of such a circle will be found to equal the sum of the baselines of the four sides of the pyramid. If a passage leading to the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber was sealed up thousands of years before the Christian era, those later admitted into the pyramid mysteries must have received their initiations in subterranean galleries now unknown. Without such galleries, there could have been no possible means of ingress or egress, since the single surface entrance was completely closed with casing stones. If not blocked by the mass of the Sphinx, or concealed in some part of that image, the secret entrance may be either in one of the adjacent temples or upon the sides of the limestone plateau. plateau. Attention is called to the granite plugs filling the ascending passageway to the Queen's chamber, which Caliph al-Mamun was forced practically to pulverize before he could clear a way into the upper chambers. C. Piazzi Smith notes that the positions of the stones demonstrate that they were set in place from above, which made it necessary for a considerable number of workmen to depart from the upper chambers. How did they do it? Smith believes they descended through the well, dropping the ramp stone into place behind them. He further contends that robbers probably used the well as a means of getting into the upper chambers. The ramp stone having been set in a bed of plaster, the robbers were forced to break through it, leaving a jagged opening. Mr. Dupre, that's D-U-P-R-E with a dash on top, an architect who has spent years investigating the pyramids, differs from Smith, however, in that he believes the well itself to be a robber's hole, being the first successful attempt made to enter the upper chambers from the subterranean chamber, then the only open section of the pyramid. Mr. Dupre bases his conclusion upon the fact that the well is merely a rough hole, and the grotto an irregular chamber, without any evidence of the architectural precision with which the remainder of the structure was erected. The diameter of the well also precludes the possibility of its having been dug downward. It must have been gorged out from below, and the grotto was necessary to supply air to the thieves. It is inconceivable that the pyramid builders would break one of their own rampstones and leave its broken surface and a gaping hole in the side wall of their otherwise perfect gallery. If the well is a robber's hole, it may explain why the pyramid was empty when Caliph al-Mamun entered it, and what happened to the missing coffer lid. A careful examination of the so-called unfinished subterranean chamber, which must have been the base of operations for the robbers, might disclose traces of their presence, or show where they piled the rubble, which must have accumulated as a result of their operations. While it is not entirely clear by what entrance the robbers reached the subterranean chamber, it is improbable that they used the descending passageway. There is a remarkable niche in the north wall of the Queen's chamber, which the Mohammedan guides glibly pronounce to be a shrine. The general shape of this niche, however, with its walls converging by a series of overlaps like those of the Grand Gallery, would indicate that originally it had been intended as a passageway. Efforts made to explore this niche have been non-productive, but Mr. Dupre believes an entrance to exist here through which, if a well did not exist at the time, the workmen made their exit from the pyramid after dropping the stone plugs into the ascending gallery. Biblical scholars have contributed a number of most extraordinary conceptions regarding the Great Pyramid. This ancient edifice has been identified by them as Joseph's granary, despite his hopelessly inadequate capacity, as the tomb prepared for the unfortunate Pharaoh of the Exodus, who could not be buried there because his body was never recovered from the Red Sea, and finally as a perpetual confirmation of the infallibility of the numerous prophecies contained in the authorized version. The Sphinx. Although the Great Pyramid, as Ignatius Donnelly has demonstrated, is patterned after an antediluvian type of architecture, examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world, the Sphinx, in brackets Hu, H-U, is typically Egyptian. The stele between his paws states the Sphinx is an image of the sun god, Harmacis, that's H-A-R-M-A-C-K-I-S, which was evidently made in the similitude of the pharaoh during whose reign it was chiselled. The statue was restored and completely excavated by Thutmose IV as a result of a vision in which the god had appeared and declared himself oppressed by the weight of the sand about his body. The broken beard of the Sphinx was discovered during excavations between the front paws. The steps leading up to the Sphinx, and also the temple and altar between the pools, are much later additions, probably Roman, for it is known that the Romans reconstructed many Egyptian antiquities. The shallow depression in the crown of the head, once thought to be the terminus of a closed-up passageway leading from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, was merely intended to help support a headdress now missing. Metal rods have been driven into the Sphinx in a vain attempt to discover chambers or passages within its body. The major part of the Sphinx is a single stone, but the front pores have been built up of smaller stones. The Sphinx is about 200 feet long, 70 feet high, and 38 feet wide across the shoulders. The main stone from which it was carved is believed by some to have been transported from distant quarries by methods unknown, while others assert it to be a native rock, possibly an outcropping somewhat resembling the form into which it was later carved. The theory once advanced that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were built from artificial stones made on the spot has been abandoned. A careful analysis of the limestone shows it to be composed of small sea creatures called murmelites. The popular supposition that the Sphinx was the true portal of the Great Pyramid, while it survives with surprising tenacity, has never been substantiated. P. Christian presents this theory as follows, basing it in part upon the authority of Iamblichus. The Sphinx of Giza, says the author of the Traité des Mystères, served as the entrance to the sacred subterranean chambers in which the trials of the initiate were undergone. This entrance, obstructed in our day by sands and rubbish, may still be traced between the forelegs of the crouched colossus. It was formerly closed by a bronze gate, whose secret spring could be operated only by the Magi. It was guarded by public respect, and a sort of religious fear maintained its inviolability better than armed protection would have done. In the belly of the Sphinx were cut-out galleries leading to the subterranean part of the Great Pyramid. These galleries were so artfully crisscrossed along their course to the pyramid that in setting forth into the passage without a guide through this network, one ceaselessly and inevitably returned to the starting point. See Histoire de la Magi for more information. Unfortunately, the bronze door referred to cannot be found, nor is there any evidence that it ever existed. The passing centuries have wrought many changes in the Colossus, however, and the original opening may have been closed. Nearly all students of the subject believe that subterranean chambers exist beneath the Great Pyramid. Robert Ballard writes, "The priests of the pyramids of Lake Moeris had their vast subterranean residences. It appears to me more than probable that those of Giza were similarly provided, and I may go further. Out of these very caverns may have been excavated the limestone of which the pyramids were built. In the bowels of a limestone ridge on which the pyramids are built will yet be found, I feel convinced, ample information as to their uses. A good diamond drill with 200 or 300 feet of rods is what is wanted to test this, and the solidarity of the pyramids at the same time. See the solution of the pyramid problem for more information." Mr. Ballard's theory of extensive underground apartments and quarries brings up an important problem in architectonics. The pyramid builders were too far-sighted to endanger the permanence of the Great Pyramid by placing over 5 million tons of limestone and granite on any but a solid foundation. It is, therefore, reasonably certain that such chambers or passageways as may exist beneath the building are relatively insignificant, like those within the body of the structure, which occupy less than 1/1600th of the cubic contents of the pyramid. The Sphinx was undoubtedly erected for symbolical purposes at the instigation of the priestcraft. The theories that the uraeus, that's U-R-A-E-U-S, AEUS upon its forehead was originally the finger of an immense sundial, and that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were used to measure time, the seasons, and the precession of the equinoxes, are ingenious, but not wholly convincing. If this great creature was erected to obliterate the ancient passageway leading into the subterranean temple of the pyramid, its symbolism would be most appropriate. In comparison with the overwhelming size and dignity of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx is almost insignificant. Its battered face, upon which may still be seen vestiges of the red paint with which the figure was originally covered, is disfigured beyond recognition. Its nose was broken off by a fanatical Mohammedan, lest the followers of the Prophet be led into idolatry. The very nature of its construction, and the present repairs necessary to prevent the head from falling off, indicate that it could not have survived the great periods of time which have elapsed since the erection of the pyramid. To the Egyptians, the Sphinx was the symbol of strength and intelligence. It was portrayed as androgynous, to signify that they recognized the initiates and gods as partaking of both the positive and negative creative powers. Gerald Massey writes, "This is the secret of the Sphinx. The orthodox Sphinx of Egypt is masculine in front and feminine behind. So is the image of Sut Typhon, a type of horn and tail, male in front and female behind. The pharaohs, who wore the tail of the lioness or cow behind them, were male in front and female behind. Like the gods, they included the dual totality of being in one person, born of the mother, but of both sexes as the child. See the natural Genesis." Most investigators have ridiculed the Sphinx, and, without even deigning to investigate the great colossus, have turned their attention to the more overwhelming mystery of the pyramid. Okay, I think we're about to start a new piece, and we only have 12 minutes left of the show. Would anyone like to have a discussion now, or would they prefer me to keep reading? Okay, I'll just keep reading.
Let's go. Yeah, let's go ahead and use this time to remind the listeners the book that you're reading from, where we can find you. Although I gave just that brief description of where to find you on YouTube there, you could give us a greater detail of how to find you, so that we can hear more of that beautiful narration voice that you have, and so that our listeners can learn more about what it is you have to offer.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, well, this book is called Secret Teachings of All Ages, written by Manley P. Hall in the 1920s. It's available. I am reading the copy that is on a website called sacredtext.com, which is copyright 3. It's the original version, although it's transcribed into digital text. People can find me on my YouTube channel called Amber's Place. These recordings will be uploaded to that channel at some point, I promise. At the moment, there's not much content on there, but you can always message me through that channel. People can also find me on Facebook by looking for the group Amber's Place. And people can find me on Discord. If you download the app or access the Discord website, then people can find me on there. My username is Amber. And I think that's it at the moment. Thank you, Kat.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you. And also a reminder to our listeners that you are listening to Steempunk Radio, likely on your TuneIn app, maybe on radio.co, maybe somewhere else you found us, probably on YouTube on Disintegral's Cloud Therapy channel, which I invite you guys to join. I love watching the sun rise and the amazing things that he does to show us what is in our skies. Mel, if you would like to go ahead and continue and just close out the show with, is there maybe just a small section we could go with?
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I can say something.
Hello, Lenny.
Doc!
Back.
Glad you're back,
Doc.
Doc.
Let me explain the nice little adventure that I took. What happened was that the station dropped off, and since Discord was being choppy, I moved over to Cloud Therapy. And so I've been listening to the reading on Cloud Therapy and communicating with Lee and picking up the station when it drops, rebooting the computer. And it's much like yesterday. The station's been dropping and picking up so that the people who are listening on air to Steempunk Radio are getting mixes of this oratory and prior radio shows. So somebody was listening through the station that I could see because I do have the station going, and it's actually been running for 14 minutes. So the people who are listening have definitely heard about the Sphinx and the pyramid, and that's what we wanted people to hear about. So I think this was a wonderful show, even though technically it didn't quite work the way I had asked for it to work. I think that there's something going on with the AI in the system and the way that rural areas are hooked up. We're not totally controlled by the AI because it still takes time to do the switching and get back onto the old technology. But there's a lot of technological innovation in the world that happens in cities at very high pace that doesn't translate into rural America, and rural America doesn't translate into the rest of the world at all. And so I think that by being in rural America and not having the regular services that everybody has come to from the way the world works, I've got some new theories on how things are going. And I was watching the other day where some financial institution was talking about hooking up 2.5 billion people to the great resources of the finance industry. And I needed my barf bag to get through the whole thing of what they were talking about, because they're trying to monetize poor people and get their IDs and get them into the system before it fails so it can drag everything out of the whole thing. But the world doesn't work under monetary systems, and people who don't use money aren't poor in any stretch of the imagination, except when you talk about money. And so it sort of freaked me out that they are going to essentially electronicize the individuals who don't know anything about how the world works. It reminds me of when cameras came out and some people were afraid that if you took their picture, you'd capture their soul and didn't want to get photographed. This is the new way on Steempunk Radio. Mel, you did a great job of orating today.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed watching the clouds and having a conversation with Lee while listening, knowing that if I tried to switch to Discord was being extremely choppy when I left it, and I had good audio from the, so I didn't really see a purpose to change. Lee, Kat, awesome job. Dennis, thanks for chiming in when you did to hold the conversation in the second oration. I think 3 orations with 3 discussion breaks work rather well for what we're doing here, because that gives everybody time to reflect. And I find it interesting that in my notebook of reflections, I still had time to think about how things go in the world of Hermes and what he talked about. And it just seems amazing how far different the world is portrayed from what we listen to in the oration today. I mean, night and day.
Absolutely. It is night and day. I find it interesting when you mentioned about the photographs earlier as well, about how people used to be scared that their soul would be captured. Somebody possessed their photograph. And I wonder if that was derived from people can connect to other people's energies better with a photograph. It seems to me that fear possibly derived from that idea in the past.
I recall reading a book called The Seven Princes of Amber by Roger Zelazny. And in the book, it was a science fiction, and the relatives of each other in the ruling class had a deck of cards, and they could just pull out their brother or sister's card and go into the card and be out of the situation they were in and in the place where their brother and sister. So they had temporal time loops through the whole thing.
Wow. That would be handy, wouldn't it?
It sure would. You get yourself in a mess of trouble and say, oh, I'm out of here, and jump off into another time and place.
Mm.
But I read that book when I was a teenager, and it was very, very light reading, breezy type of book. It wasn't in-depth science fiction like what we get now. But just all the coincidence means I'm going to go and see if I can't find a copy of the book. It was actually a series of books, but the first book, I think, pretty much gave the plot for the whole situation. I like how science fiction has created modern times, and that the magic fiction of Harry Potter has finally sunk in so that people can understand that magic is a function of reality if you believe it can be, and that if we can get from having narrow windows of belief to just taking it that we trust other people who believe differently, I think we could solve a lot of the world's problems on human scale. But I don't believe the population is ready to have their problems solved by outside sources. We need to solve our own problems ourselves.
Absolutely. Fully agree.
And I'd like to thank the listening audience for being here with us today. It has been a great and encouraging show. Tune in again tomorrow when our guest will be somebody and our discussion will be on some topic that I couldn't tell you what it'll be about now because it's not 5 minutes before the show and I don't have to choose a topic yet. So you take care, enjoy your Wednesday, and at noon today, think about doing a quick Fibonacci breath and catching yourself and seeing where you are in time. For those people who are ahead of noon today, enjoy your evening because it has been a pleasant and interesting adventure. The clock says that the connection is over, so I guess we're done.
Brilliant. I'm going to change my headset because I need to get on with dinner in the kitchen. I need these headphones. Oh, they do hurt my ears. So thank you very much for those who sent me some Reiki.
Yeah, good job. I hope it helped.
I think it did a little bit. Yes, it did. It didn't get rid of it completely, but it did help. Definitely. Okay. Thank you. It's my fault. I think it's just I forgot to put my cushions on this rocking chair that I normally have. So.
Well, I knew it was your fault. You didn't need to tell me that.
Okay, back in a sec.
Yep.